So, Midnight Monster asked, "Hikers and backpackers, what is the weirdest or creepiest thing that you've ever found while hiking?" I have 8 selected stories for you today, and I promise they do not disappoint. Any hikers and backpackers who are out there and you have your stories you want to share, drop them down below in the comment section, and who knows, maybe I'll read one. Story 1. Went on a 5-day gold panning trip with a couple of buddies of mine. We drove 6 hours down unused logging roads. We're talking overgrown roads with trees having to be removed from the road to pass. We saw not one human the entire time we were out there, except for on the 3rd night at 3 a.m. We're sitting around the fire drinking some beers, swatting at bugs, and shooting the shit when I hear something. I look over and notice some lights in the tree. What the? It's a truck. Driving up the logging road we cleared ourselves to get there at 3 a.m. The truck gets up to where we are, pulls into we made the camp, and sits there for 10 seconds while we all kinda just stare in shock at one another. I get up and start walking towards the truck to say hello and ask what the heck they're doing here at 3 a.m. on an abandoned logging road when the truck just backs up, turns around and drives off the way it came. The guys just drove 6 hours down logging roads all through the night, sees us and leaves without saying a word. We're all sitting there going, what the fuck? We all figured this guy was driving down the road, getting out, and coming back to kill us in our sleep. The next morning, we head back down to the road, and we see nothing. They did not set up a camp or anything, they just left. We figure we were likely camped out near a grow-op for one of the gangs, Hell's Angels most likely, and they were coming out to check who had come to their spot, or they were there to pick the crop up in the middle of the night. Another story I have for you is, one time driving down a bunch of logging roads at night, maybe 4 a.m., looking for a campsite we have driven past. We took a wrong turn and drove into one of those drug operation cashing out the crop. We turn a corner and blam, floodlights and 15 guys all staring at us in the middle of the forest down logging roads. We just sorta turned around and got the fuck out of there. And final story. One time I was out hiking in the backwoods with a buddy of mine, way out there with nobody in sight. In the evening, I start to gather some wood for the campfire. That evening, I pull this stick out of the trees. It's maybe 5 feet long and 3 inches wide. It looks like a nice walking stick, straight and mostly smooth. Then I notice that one of the stick, it's smooth like it's been whittled by someone. I'm thinking, oh, wow, what are the odds of that? It is a walking stick. Someone has carved a smooth handle on one end. Nope, it's not a handle. It's a dick. Someone had carved the end of the stick as a penis. Someone was fucking the forest, literally. This was not some crude carving for your information. This was work. Like the person put hours into carving it and was very good at carving. This was a 6-inch dong, carved with love and feeling right down to its having bulging veins and fine details. Yeah, I know, what the fuck. So I took the dick stick back to the camp and threatened to poke my buddy with it, yelling at the forest it was going to give him tree AIDS. I work in the outdoor field and lead trips regularly. I once led a trip to the top of Mount Stringer in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top, about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle school kids and 1 co-instructor. We were camping out at the top of the mountain and it was a beautiful night with a full moon. The kids and the other co-instructors went to bed in their tents. I chose to spend the night in a hammock that night. I was really into the book I was reading, so I stayed up and read it until about 10:30. I turned my headlamp off to settle for the night. Everything was around me was rather bright from the moon and from the position I was in. I could see down the trail we had hiked to get to the top. I lay there enjoying the scenery and noticed something moving on the trail. Bears are common in this area, so I perked up. As it got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere and someone was hiking up the trail with no headlamp or any gear. I was just frozen watching this person move closer to our camp. They arrived at the top of the mountain where we were and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man surveying our camp. I really could only see the outline of him. He stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes, but may have only been 10. He then turned and sat down under a tree facing our camp. He was sitting up in a way that I knew he wasn't trying to sleep. He just sat there staring at our camp. I had no idea what to do. I decided to wait it out. I waited, just staring at the man while he stared at the camp. This went on until about 3:30 a.m. Then he stood up, took a moment to survey my camp a few more minutes longer, then went back down the trail he came upon. I, to this day, have no idea what that was all about, but it freaked me out. I was paranoid that we were being followed for the rest of the trip. I was once canoeing the boundary waters between Minnesota and Canada. These aren't normal backyard ponds. The boundary waters are thousands of enormous lakes interconnected with each other. Think mini Great Lakes. We'd been canoeing and camping along the lakes for about a week at this point. We did not have an itinerary, just planned to boat and camp, fish, and live off the land for about 2 weeks. We had a GPS and a satellite phone to call a helicopter for pickup whenever we were done. Anyways, about a week in and we were set to canoe a few hours in the next lake. An hour or so in and we are at the center of an extremely long and narrow lake. Unfortunately, a storm started to blow in and the waves on the lake swelled to 2+ feet. Too much for our dinky canoes. We pull off to a random clearing on the shore and set up camp in a rush to avoid being thrashed by a rainstorm. We just set up the camp and hunkered down for the night. By the next morning, I had cleared it up. We started walking up the coast and the lake about 200 feet from the camp looking for a good fishing spot. What we found was another campsite. However, it was wrecked. Trash was strewn everywhere and the tent was collapsed and torn. Clothes were on the ground. At first, we were just disgusted, what assholes did this? Or why would they leave their shit to bear food? The more we looked through, though, the weirder things seemed. For one, their garbage was still hoisted into a tree to keep it safe from bears. But the whole bag was ripped open despite being 30 feet in the air. Second, literally everything except the canoes was still at the campsite. Clothes, packs, foods, ropes, pans, like a serious set of hiking equipment. Enough for 2 or 3 people. Half of it was trashed and torn open, mostly the packs, tents, and clothes. The other half was untouched but thrown on the ground like somebody noped the hell out of there and nothing but their long johns, ditching hundreds of dollars of gear in the process. We waited a couple hours and eventually called it back to our helicopter crew, but they had not been aware of anybody else getting any distress calls. We eventually just left everything and moved camp. Everybody was pretty upset by it, and a day or 2 later, we ended the whole trip early because it seemed like nobody wanted to be out there anymore. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. My first thought was a bear attack, but there was food left uneaten. And I've seen bear attacks on camps before. Nothing like this. Bears rip open packs and go after food and are genuinely pretty easy to scare away. What still sticks with me is why all their clothes and packs were still there, with half being destroyed and half being untouched. I still don't get it. I've done a lot of other camping and hiking, rafting, and biking all around the country, and I've never had any other weird experiences like that. I and a buddy chose some national forest in Oregon, specifically for how remote it was. About a year prior, a family became lost and the father was never found, although the mother and child lived to tell the tale. Anyways, we set up camp around 4 p.m. after getting pretty deep into the woods on a mountain accessible to logging roads, maybe about 100 to 200 yards from where we parked near a lake. Without much else to do, we started a fire and cracked open some beers as the sun went down. Then pickup trucks started going through the woods, slowing down when they saw our campfire. We got curious and stupid via the beers and went deeper into the woods. Seemed like hell of a party was going on. Then we stumbled onto a clearing where maybe 15 to 20 dudes were hanging around a bonfire next to a mossy rundown camper trailer. One had a pistol on his hip, another was chilling with a shotgun. We're like, oh shit. But someone approaches us and acts neighborly and invites us to have a beer, so it seemed okay. They were joking around mostly, some talking about drugs, coke, meth. But some older dudes seemed pretty tense. As this happened, 4 to 5 dudes who seemed to be standing sentry at the camper, which did not look like it had been moved in a long time, went inside for a few minutes. When they came back out, they said we were queers and saw us making out. Pretty quickly, I got up to head back to our side, but my slower, drunker buddy took a few punches. Then he did make it out and started following as we were sprinting through the forest and the darkness, just hoping to get back to our side by spotting those glowing embers of our burnt-out fire. The whole time with gun toters in tow. We found our site with pretty much everything in the tent. We pulled the stake to toss them into the trunk of our car. Then we hear enraged screams about 50 yards from us. Kill those guys! So we were like, fuck it. Dropped the tent and gear without even saying a word to each other and sprinted in the direction of the car. We peeled out and thought we were good, but about 30 seconds later, some headlights come up from behind us. And I'm like, fuck, that's the truck the shotgun dude was chilling at. So, now we're being persuaded by gun-toting rednecks with a superior vehicle in the unfamiliar forest, unmaintained logging roads in the dark. And the only thing we can do is speed up. I remember looking at the speedometer as we approached the washed-up hairpin turn. It was moving from 45 to 50, and the truck was tailing us pretty close, like by only a couple of feet. I was pretty sure that we were going to slide off the cliff and die. Somehow, my drunk-ass buddy managed to power slide that turn and get some distance between us and the tweakers, as we eventually made it to a paved 2-lane road, at which point the truck pulled off. We put it together later that the camper was a meth lab. Nothing else it really could have been deep in the forest with armed guards and shit. But yeah, it resulted in a drunken high-speed night chase on unfamiliar logging roads, and we nearly slid off the side of a mountain. I was camping and hiking in the Okefenokee Swamp. We, my girlfriend and me, were far from being the only ones there, but then we woke up one morning and we took a canoe out into the swamps to explore. It was early and there was a thick layer of fog resting just atop of the water. The whole swamp was completely still. No animals in sight at all. We paddled down the waterway for a while and saw nothing else. Not a single person, not a bird, not anything. We did not hear a single sound. We had just cornered a bend in the swamp, and we hear it, the loudest gut bellow I've ever heard in my life. I could feel it echo through my chest, a true dinosaur sound. We stopped paddling and looked at each other, creeped out. We knew it was an alligator, but we have never heard one that loud. We both looked behind the canoe, and behind us, the backs of the eyes of at least 20 gators had risen. They had just surfaced out of nowhere, and we slowly start to paddle forward, and we hear more bellows. They came from us at all around, in front, behind, to the side. Sounds emanating from the bush-covered banks. With each glance behind us, we saw more eyes appear. More scaled mounds break the water's surface. From the banks in front, we could catch tails sliding into the water. Ripples of these huge reptiles broke the water all around us. We looked back again as we paddled faster and faster. Easily 40 alligators behind us now. We began to see them appear in front. 10, 15, huge lizards seemingly blocking our path. Then, one of the largest alligators I've ever seen surfaced right where my paddle was going down. I hit the beast on the back of the head, and the thrash he made was incredible. When his massive head hit the side of the small canoe, I thought we were going in the water. Water came in the canoe as the side dipped down. The beast disappeared below the boat, and we held steady. We paddled forward as fast as we could, right onto the dotted landscapes of scales and eyes. Behind us, the same gut roar echoing through my body. As we cut through the fields of our eyes and backs, we started to see the path clear. The huge monster that had almost just capsized us bellowed out one last time. We turned as we made it past the last of the animals and we could see the monster just staring at us, watching us leave. All the other alligators began to sink into the water's floor. The big guy stayed there watching until he was satisfied we had gone, I guess. Then he disappeared without a sound back into the black, murky depths of the swamp. We banked the canoe further up the waterway, go out, and just sat around for a while taking in what had just happened. A few years ago, I was hiking somewhere on the border of Montana and Idaho. The exact location escapes me at the moment. I was with my uncle and the hike was something like 6 miles in, 6 miles out from TH to a lake. Keep in mind that this is a very remote area. To even get to the TH was about 20 to 30 mile drive onto dirt logging roads. There was no other cars at the TH and we did not see any on the trail the entire day. On the hike in, we noticed a makeshift camp set up along the trails to our right. This was by no means designated camping area. It just happened to be enough of a clearing to pitch up a tent and have a small area to walk around in. The camp looked somewhat disheveled and there was nobody in the immediate sight. We continued to the lake, ate lunch, and headed home sometime later in the afternoon. On our way back, the camp was now to our left. Now that we were headed in the opposite direction, the camp came into view much sooner along the trail than it did in our hike in. It was a few minutes until I reached this camp. I had a very eerie feeling now. From this direction, I could see that the tent flap was unzipped entirely. I found this strange and scanned the camp for residents. By the time we reached the camp, nobody had appeared, and I decided to yell out to anyone who may be in the camp. Maybe to say hello, maybe to see if anyone needed any help. I just had a strange feeling that something was wrong here. At this point, my uncle was very much freaked out and was trying to continue walking along without incident. I yelled out 3 or 4 more times towards the camp, each time walking closer and closer to the tent. I got no response. I stood a few feet away from the tent and scanned around the hills, and there was nobody in sight. The camp looked the same as it did on our hike. Upon further inspection, I could see a few items strewn about the grounds beyond the tent, but my first stop was going to be that tent. I thought for a few seconds and pounded exactly what I might find in the tent. I was scared of waking someone, but more scared of finding someone who may not be able to wake up. I crept closer and my uncle reluctantly followed up 10 paces behind. I yelled a few more times. No answer. I pushed aside the flap and there's nothing but a sleeping bag, laid out perfectly as if someone had just unrolled it. Keep in mind this is a very nice tent, perfectly assembled as well. Nice vestibule, spacious and sturdy. It struck me odd that somebody would leave such a nice tent here so foolish to have it unzipped. So I stood, scanning again. This tent was just a few 100 feet away from a very small water source. There were various items, as I said earlier, every 50 feet or so. I noticed a Ziploc bag on the top of the boulder right next to the stream. I headed over there and found that it contained several strips of uncooked bacon. Again, strange. My thoughts were racing and I had an overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I put the bacon where I found it and looked around again. Nobody was here. We hadn't seen anyone all day, and this camp looked the same as it did in the morning. Who in their right mind would leave this bag of bacon sitting right here? Who would even bring bacon at the first place at a place like this? And how? There was no ice chest, not even a car at the TH. Why would you bring food like that into an area where there's mountain lions and bears? There wasn't even a stove or any cooking utensils in sight. This was a very barren camp. My thoughts began to slow down and I looked to my feet. I saw several shell cases and several rounds to a .45 caliber handgun. This was the icing on the what the fuck cake. My uncle insisted we leave immediately, and at this point, I agreed. We hiked rather quickly out, counter-pacing. I calculated that the makeshift camp was about 1 mile from the TH. I still have no idea what could have been happened at that camp. Still freaks me out, but it makes for a very good story. I was on a long road trip with a friend about 2 years ago when we stopped in an incredibly remote area. It was a huge forested area on the coast with a military base tucked away somewhere in there. My friend and I decided to go for a hike at about 9 p.m. It might seem like a stupid idea, but their area wasn't exactly mountainous. It was a pretty bright night and we were well geared, so if we got lost we could have easily waited out the night. We sort of forgot that it was Halloween until we were halfway through the hike, talking about how big that moon was. A 20-minute walk away from the empty car park and approximately 20 to 30-minute drive to civilization. As we walked, we could hear thumping, but we disregarded it, maybe kangaroos. It was scary at first to hear something that big go racing past in a dark blue, but it happened so often we got used to it. When we neared the coast, we could hear the waves rolling in. We searched around for a way down to the beach when suddenly we heard something different. There was a steep descent on one side of the path and we could hear something big climbing up from the water. Branches were snapping and you could hear heavy breathing as it got further and further up. My friend turned to leave when we heard a man's voice say shakily, "Hello?" My friend looked at me and shook his head and I backed away silently. I'm instinctively curious. "Hello?" I called back. "Is this the path?" Holy shit. Somebody had fallen off the path on the way to the beach. Yeah, we'll pull you up." Using a broken branch, we pulled him to the path. He stood up, thanked us, and said, "Have you seen my friend?" No. "I'm sure he'll be around. Thanks, guys." And with that, he walked off. We went to the beach, skipped some stones, and on the way back, we saw him again standing on the path with another man. They were just standing there talking quietly. We passed them and said goodnight and received a mumbled reply. We walked on. When we got to our car, there was a 4-wheel drive parked not far away. There's no way we could have missed that. It was right in front of our headlights. When we did come from and how did we pass his friend? How did they get split up? Who fucking knows? This happened back in the mid-80s. My friends and I, 4 in all, used to go hiking in the Cascades in Oregon quite a bit. While 99% of the hikers stick to the trails, we'd plan trips off the beaten path to discover areas few people had ever seen. We'd plan a trip, take a trail up to the general area, then strike out towards a place we wanted to check out. Sometimes a day or two, depending on how rough the terrain was. Our last trip started normally enough. We'd made it out to our launch point, spent the night, had breakfast throughout the following day, and had broken out to our Forest Service topographical maps to make our plans. This time around, we hadn't decided on a destination and were considering our options. That's the last thing we remember for nearly 24 hours. We woke up the next day, still in our clothes from the previous day, sitting in our tents. We didn't even know a day passed until one of my friends checked his watch and noticed that the date was not right, which I confirmed with my watch. Yes, even back then some watches kept the date. One moment we were looking over maps to see where we wanted to go. The next, we woke up with our tents and all of us feeling like we were hungover. The thing is, while my friends swore they did not remember anything, I did, if only a little. What I remember is that we were doing some hard hiking in the mountains when we heard children's voices. The sort of noise you hear at a playground. All of us were like, "What the fuck?" Thinking that we screwed up on our navigational skills in a way that boggled the mind. We headed towards the noise just to see how the hell we've gotten so far off track. We were on God's green earth. Where are we? We broke out the trail line and clear area where there were several low, squat buildings that sort of remind you of what the US Army builds. Spare, utilitarian, ugly, and green. Surrounding the buildings, I assume all the way around, but I don't know, was a heavy-duty chain-link fence, but not the normal sort, the industrial strength kind. Towards where we were was a large blacktop, where children were running around, and a mixed group of kids and adults were also playing a game of basketball. It was, indeed, a playground of sports. Inside of what looked like a military compound, out in the middle of fucking nowhere, deep in the mountains and not on any map. I remember one of the adults looking up, then eventually gradually falling silent as the entire group of adults and kids eventually noticed the 4 dumbstruck hikers on the other side of the fence, and then nothing. That's until I woke up in one of our tents the next day. As I said, my friends said they remembered nothing, and all they wanted to do after they realized they lost today was get the fuck out of the mountains and go back home. Me, I remembered, at least a little, and I was pissed because I figured we had stumbled onto something secret and had been drugged and dumped back to our campsite for our efforts. I wanted to figure out what the hell we've been hiking, go back, and see what there was to see, but the guys were having none of it. I tried several times to see if I could get any of the gang to go back up there with me, this time with cameras, and try to figure out where we decided to hike, but the guys flat out refused any discussion of the matter, much less an actual attempt. Going by yourself into the wild country is outright stupid, and I wasn't quite so pissed as to consider this a valid option. So, I never went there on my own. To this day, I have no idea what it is that we found, or why someone thought it was necessary to drug us and dump us. I figured we weren't killed outright because 4 missing, experienced hikers would result in a newsworthy search and rescue operation, especially since one of us was sort of famous, and just make the national news if they'd up and disappeared. I'm still pissed about it though, and would seriously like to dish out some payback to the shitstains who fucked with us. Guys, that was 8 hiking and camping stories that are just creepy and unexplained. If you enjoyed today's content, make sure you press the like button and do subscribe to the channel. Midnight Monster releases daily videos and we cover all sorts of topics. So, I hope to see you in tomorrow's video. Have a great night.